Good evening, Board of Appeal meeting for January 16th, 2018. First item is our minutes from December, and I believe all members got a copy. If they could just take a peek, and if there's any changes warranted. John was not with us. I don't have them. Let me see. So our meeting was December 19th. Okay, Adam, and that's a second by anyone? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. We have 4 petitions before us, and I'm going to start with Lebanon Street. And Attorney McDonald is here, I believe. Okay.
You can have a seat. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Patrick McDonald on behalf of this petitioner with offices at 477 Eastern Avenue. This is a petition by the owner and operator, or hopefully the operator of the convenience store known as
Sorry, Pat, I didn't read the notice. Let me just...
Oh, sure.
Yeah, especially the way we have 2. My bad. I can work with this one. I don't want to quote the right one, though. Is it this one? You know how it's 2? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this petition is the petition of Mohammed Hussein for a variance of section 700.1.5, chapter 12 of the revised ordinances of 1991 as amended of the City of Malden, general regulations, any non-conforming building, structure, or use abandoned or not used for a period of 2 or more years shall thereafter be used only in conformance with the provisions of this ordinance. And this is as per plans of the property known as at numbered 457-465 Lebanon Street, also known by City Assessor Parcel ID, map 138, block 788, parcel 806. And we read the wrong one, Mr. McDonald.
Well, there are actually 2.
Right, and I think I just read the second one. The first one we were going to address was the appeal of the building inspector's administrative appeal of the building inspector.
That's correct.
Right, and I apologize, I just read the second one.
Well, I was assuming that they basically would be dealt with contemporaneously. It makes no difference to me, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
I'd like to read both in, though.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to read in the petition of Mohammed Hussein / El Sheikha Associates LLC for a variance of section 800.4.1.3, chapter 12 of the revised ordinances of 1991, as amended of the City of Malden administration, to hear and decide appeals of decisions or orders made by the building inspector or other administrative official, as per plans at the property known as at numbered 457-465 Lebanon Street, also known by a City Assessor Parcel, map 138, block 788, parcel 806. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just say preliminarily, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's technically an appeal under two separate sections of the ordinance. It's just that it's an appeal under the section pursuant to section 700, but it's the section pursuant to section 800 that invests this board with the ability to consider administrative appeals of the decision of the building inspector. So, as indicated in the notice, this is the petition of the Sheikh Associates LLC and its principal, Mr. Mohammed Hussein, relative to the operation or reestablishment of the operation of the convenience store business known as In-N-Out Convenience and located at 457-465 Lebanon Street. The Commissioner, pursuant to Section 700.1.5 of the ordinance, has denied the request for a certificate of occupancy, determining that the period of non-use of the pre-existing grandfathered, non-conforming commercial use of that property located in a Residence A zoning district exceeded 2 years, which is the period under the ordinance that is defined as effectively an abandonment of that use, and therefore would constitute a loss of the grandfathered status. So we're specifically appealing Commissioner Miller's decision in that respect, pursuant to the provision under Section 800 of the Code, which gives this board the authority to hear appeals related, discretionary appeals related to the Commissioner's decision. Our position with respect to the Commissioner's decision is as follows. While it is certainly undeniable that there has been a period of non-use of the pre-existing non-conforming commercial use as a convenience store for the property that exceeded 2 years, we believe that there are compelling and extenuating circumstances related to that period that suggest that this board ought to exercise its discretion with regard to that very technical assessment by the building inspector. In support of the certificate of occupancy was a very detailed and involved and supplemented letter written by co-counsel to the petitioner, Attorney Christopher Fallon, that laid out, and I assume is part of the board's file, but can't be sure. It would have been part of the file in the jacket maintained by the building inspector. But it can be summarized fairly as follows. The petitioner and the principal, Mr. Hossain, was a party to a very lengthy and contentious divorce proceeding in the Middlesex Probate and Family Court with his prior spouse. That proceeding, and as a consequence of that proceeding, he was essentially prohibited, pursuant to court order of the Middlesex Probate Court, for a very lengthy period of time with respect to operating that business. What had happened was that a divorce was initiated in 2013 by his former spouse, in September of 2013, and relative to certain machinations that occurred and relative to the dispute between those two divorcing parties, the court actually appointed a receiver to operate the business for a period of time. That receiver took occupancy of the business and, pursuant to court order, began to operate it and exercise control over it in September of 2014. However, there were significant problems and complaints by both parties with respect to the manner in which the receiver had been operating the business that resulted in the court ultimately removing that receiver and essentially entering a court order that said there would be no operation of this business until such time as the parties, pursuant to their pending divorce proceeding, were able to arrive at some kind of an agreement. They ultimately were able to come to an agreement and to conclude their divorce proceeding, but they were prohibited by court order for this period. It exceeded the 2-year period that is provided for and allowed for under the ordinance. Eventually, the matter was resolved, and during this 2-year period, by the way, the literal keys to the establishment were entrusted to the attorney for the former spouse of the petitioner. He was instructed to hold on to those keys and to not permit them to be used and the business to be opened or operated until such time as a further court order actually authorized it. Now, again, that did eventually occur because these parties were able to resolve their divorce proceeding. But for that lengthy period, which exceeded the 2-year quote-unquote abandonment period under the ordinance, Mr. Hossain was prohibited by court order from occupying the property and operating the business in accordance with what was its grandfathered use. So we suggest to the board that again represents a compelling, extenuating circumstance. That this in fact was not an abandonment as contemplated by the ordinance, because had he had the ability to operate this business, had he not been prohibited by virtue of a court order, he would have been operating this business. But he was completely unable to do so because of the existence of that court order. So that's our first position on the kind of technical issue that's before the board tonight. We certainly appreciate Building Commissioner Miller's technical interpretation of the ordinance. He looks at a situation and he sees that the business has not been operating for 2 years. This grandfathered use has not been taking place for 2 years. If it goes past 2 years, it is beyond the period provided for in the ordinance, and therefore he's compelled under the ordinance to say, you are beyond the 2-year period. I have to determine your use as having been abandoned and deny your occupancy permit. But I do suggest to this board that because you are invested under Section 800 of the code with the ability to review those administrative decisions, that you also have the discretion to hear the backstory, so to speak. And as I said, I think we make a plausible and persuasive argument regarding particular compelling and extenuating circumstances here, so that the board could find that this was not an abandonment as contemplated by the ordinance, but in fact was a literal inability to maintain the pre-existing non-conforming use. To the extent that a more...
Excuse me for 1 second. Did
Sure.
you say September of 14 was the date on the court?
September of 14 was the date that the receiver was appointed by the court. The receiver unilaterally closed the business in July of 2015, and that was a result of the Mr. Hossain seeking emergency relief from the court because of what he alleged, and ultimately what the court found to be malfeasance and inappropriate activity literally by the receiver that the court had appointed. I can represent to the board that when this matter was finally concluded in terms of the divorce proceeding, the receiver was ordered to reimburse the parties to the proceeding for irregularities that occurred during the receiver's operation of the business. But once the receiver was removed by the court entered an order saying that this business will not be operated by anybody, and literally the keys to this business will be entrusted and held in escrow by counsel to the wife, for the wife, until such time as an agreement is reached between the parties or further court order issues. And as I said, eventually agreement was reached in the sense that these parties settled their divorce. But that's what put him beyond the 2-year period that is contemplated under the ordinance. Can you recall exactly when you resolved your divorce?
It was March 2017 or 2016, I'm not sure. It's somewhere in that beginning year.
Oh, beginning, first quarter of
Yes.
2017.
It's gonna be 17 or 16. One of those years. I'm not exactly sure, like what day.
I believe it was, and again, all of the documents, Mr. King, were submitted in the letter that was provided to the building commissioner, copies of the relevant court orders, copies of the settlement agreement. I believe it was 2017. He was very close to the 2-year period at that point in time, but couldn't get back in there. So again, our position on the issue of the 2 years is that for much, if not almost all of it, it wasn't an abandonment as contemplated by the ordinance. It was rather a court-imposed inability to actually operate the business in question.
Jim, is that letter, is that in the record? I don't think I saw it.
I don't have it in my file. I was just checking with Kathy. You don't have it in, yeah. No, I don't see anything.
Do you have a copy of that?
I don't, again, it was less about the letter, although the letter was more a summary. And as I said, it was comprehensive because Attorney Fallon at the time provided copies of all the relevant court documents, the court orders, the separation of agreement of the parties. I apologize. I assumed it would be part of the file because it was submitted in support of the certificate of occupancy application that was denied by the building commissioner.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything, and Kathy actually handles the permits to the building department. I just asked her if she recalls seeing anything that had come in the way of other documentation, but she didn't, you don't recall anything? Yeah, that's the letter from the city commissioner to the petitioner. Oh, what's right there? No? Yeah, no, nothing, Pat, that I can see in our files.
Well, I can certainly provide the letter and the accompanying documents, but I don't have them in this file,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, so. Okay. But again, that's the substance of our position on that abandonment issue, is that a significant period, if not the entire 2-year period of non-use, was not the product of what is contemplated by abandonment under the ordinance, but was in fact the product of the inability to operate the business pursuant to court order, literally court order prohibiting that until further court order issued from Middlesex Probate Court.
Curious, is there any authority beyond the ordinance itself, or is there anything in the ordinance or any case law or anything that kind of would help us on that?
I couldn't find any directly on point. I think it's a bit of a unique or maybe niche issue, to be perfectly honest. But again, given that the board is invested with the authority to hear appeals of building commissioner decisions under Section 800, I would suggest that the whole point of hearing appeals is that there are contemplated instances where the technicalities have, the technical decisions made by the building commissioner often or can have facts that aren't apparent to the building commissioner. And again, the building commissioner was made aware of all these underlying background facts. I just believe, and I don't want to speak for the commissioner, but I don't believe he felt in his capacity as building commissioner he was the proper person to be interpreting or making that decision, that was the purview of the board under Section 800.
Right.
Beyond that, and to the extent that this may also involve a consideration by the board of a more conventional zoning analysis or variance analysis, I would respectfully suggest that this is a unique property that would meet any more conventional zoning analysis. What I refer to typically is the three-prong test. What you have, first of all, is we have a unique parcel here. We have a small parcel. I believe it approximates 3,700 square feet. It is located in a Residence A district, but has historically been a pre-existing non-conforming use going back at least 50 years. I personally grew up in Maplewood. I recall as a child the Richdale convenience store being at that location when I was a child, and it's been there for entirely and continuously during that time. I can't speak to how far back before that it might have went, but it could have go back even more than 50 years at this point in time. The lot itself is problematic and unique in that, again, it's extraordinarily undersized, about 3,750 square feet. It is also further handicapped by the fact, and the board members may be aware, that there is the land immediately surrounding it is actually owned by the MBTA and has been for at least as long as it's been a convenience store, utilized by the MBTA as both a turnaround location for the Lebanon Street bus line. I believe right there at the end, almost at the Malden Melrose City line, is the end of that particular bus line, and the buses turn around behind the building in reverse direction. I also believe that buses utilize that space for mandatory rest breaks that the drivers are required to take. So it's impossible for that lot to ever get any bigger, because that strip of land that literally surrounds it is owned by the MBTA, has been for over at least half a century, and isn't likely to change in any way at this point in time. With respect to the other prongs of a more conventional zoning appeal test, again, I'd suggest that this property can meet them. This is clearly not something that denigrates the zoning code. And I say that only because while admittedly we're talking about a commercial use in a residential area, this is not a situation where someone is trying to come in and impose a new commercial use in an exclusively residential area. It, in fact, is a restoration of what has been at least a half-century commercial use at that location. And there is, given the extraordinary small size of the lot, there is almost nothing that could be done with that property other than the use. Now, there are some uses that would be allowed by right of daycare, for instance, a house of worship, for instance. I don't know that either of those would be a better or a better fit for that area. It couldn't be used as a single-family home. It's far too small. And trying to put a single-family home on a 3,750 square foot lot is not the kind of thing that's going to work. So in addition to the position we take on the ability of the board to go beyond the technicalities related to abandonment and to exercise discretion in the determination regarding that issue, that even if you were to look at this from a more conventional zoning perspective, that it meets the standard that you'd be required to find in a situation like that. Lastly, at the request and suggestion of the two ward councilors involved, Councilor Kamel in Ward 6 and Councilor Murphy in Ward 5, this petitioner sent out extensive additional notices for a neighborhood meeting. If you may recall, this matter was originally scheduled, I believe, for November of last year, and we appeared before the board asking for a postponement in order to accommodate the councilor's request for a meeting. We sent out over 200 specific notices about that meeting to a very, very large area surrounding the location, far beyond that normally considered the abutting area by statute. We held that meeting in December. It was fairly well attended. My recollection is perhaps 25 or so people showed up, as well as Councilors Kamel and Councilor Murphy. We listened to some concerns of some of the attendees. My belief is that most of the attendees favored the reopening of the business. And also in conjunction with our discussions with the ward councilor, should the board be inclined to act favorably on the petition, we have been asked, and this petitioner would happily agree to the following three conditions to satisfy some concerns of the ward councilors. The first is that for purposes of litter control, this applicant would agree to police the front and general area of the exterior of the premises no less than 3 times a day for purposes, again, of maintaining good litter control at the location. The second, and this is a request that came as much from the police department as from the ward councilors, the applicant would agree to establish video surveillance of the site that covered the front area of the building and also provided views of Lebanon Street. That was something that Police Chief Molis had indicated he would like to see if in fact the business were permitted to reopen. And the third is that this applicant would agree to a restriction or condition that prohibited seeking or obtaining any liquor license for the establishment if in fact it were to reopen. So again, those were conditions specifically requested by the ward councilors, and should the board be inclined to act favorably, we would not object and would welcome those as specific conditions on any variance granted here. Mr. Hossain is here, obviously, if the board has any questions related to the business itself, and we're happy to take any other questions from the board.
I had a couple questions and a few comments. So the lot is about 3,700 square feet and...
Correct, it is 3,300 something.
33?
My apologies.
Could be wrong, but it's 33 or 37.
37, 33 is what I have.
Maybe, yeah, that's what I made a mistake of earlier.
Yep, but the comment I wanted to make is that the current structure is essentially the footprint. There's no parking currently
Well, the building...
on his lot.
The structure does, obviously, the footprint does take up most of the lot, but there is limited space both to the rear of the building and to the side of the building. In fact, the area to the side of the building, Chairman, could accommodate essentially 2 motor vehicles. I don't know if they would be zoning compliant parking spaces in terms of length and width, but as a practical matter, there is room to park vehicles there. And the rear area of the building, there's a dumpster there now, and there's opportunity for parking. If if the variance were granted and if the establishment were to reopen, those would be utilized by employees of the establishment. The reality is that patron or customer parking would most likely occur on the public way, Lebanon Street, located directly in front of the building.
And the reason I raised the issue is I wanted to point out the ability of that property to function in other manners, that there isn't parking. You mentioned it could be a daycare, I think you said, or a...
Well, again, under the code, certain uses
So it's
are...
limited in what could in fact go there.
There are a very limited number of uses, as I said, perhaps a house of worship, a daycare, but again, the size of the structure, the size of the lot, and even the nature of those uses, I would suggest to the board certainly could not be considered a better fit, so to speak, for that area than something that's been there essentially for, again, at least 50 years, if not longer than that.
And if it was to jump over to the residential sector, it'd be back here looking for variances because of minimum lot. I think it might have frontage, but density and minimum lot it doesn't have.
It would have...
And there'd be all kinds of functional issues with the
That's
building.
right. It would have egregious dimensional control deficiencies for any realistic residential use, even a single family at this point in time.
Well, that's why I was a little confused. I'm kind of confused about are you asking for a variance of the non-use provision, or are you asking a variance for what makes the restrictions that make it a non-conforming use?
Well, what we're asking for is the board to exercise discretion relative to the building commissioner's decision that the period of abandonment has been exceeded.
I understand
Right.
that, but I'm asking, you've also asked for a variance, though. Is the variance an exemption from that 2-year non-compliance?
I suppose you could consider that as a variance. I was making an additional argument for the benefit of the board that beyond the technical issue of the appeal of the building commissioner's decision regarding the abandonment, that were this matter to be treated by the board as a more conventional request for a variance for use, that this property and this use is uniquely susceptible to that kind of finding by the board. But again, technically what's before the board is an appeal of the building commissioner's decision regarding to the 2-year abandonment. If the board wants to treat that as granting a variance to the building commissioner's decision, I'm not going to stand in the way of the board of that, but I'm not sure that that's actually what you'd be doing.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing. I mean, I don't really see too much of an issue with the building commissioner's decision, but I do probably can maybe see that there's some latitude in the 2-year period and when that would start. I mean, the property was basically out of his control from 2014 until, not through any reasons other than, personal reasons that he had. And then it was just, he wasn't allowed to open it even though he had the intent to do it. Well, close up.
Any other comments from the board or questions? If not, if Mr. McDonald's done, we'll open up to the public.
Thank you.
We have a number of folks that have written in letters, and I know there's a number of folks here that want to speak. So why don't I read our letters? If someone's here who's also written in, totally up to yourself if you still want to come up and speak. So let me start with the letters that came in support of this board granting a variance. What do we have? One, two. Okay, this is all. So we did receive from Jane Roby of 58 Crescent Lane. Would Jane be with us this evening? Okay, so I could read your letter, or you can come up when we bring folks up. Would you? Okay. So she's writing to support the granting of the variance. The store serves many immediate needs in the neighborhood. It is in a way the focal point of this section of Maple Maplewood Heights because of its location at the intersection of Lebanon Street and Swains Pond Ave, where the road turns sharply northwest, and because it's a turnaround point and waiting area for the 106 bus. The store brings life to the corner. Having an empty storefront for so long gives the impression of a neighborhood in decline, which it is not. Some may argue that the neighborhood doesn't need the In-N-Out because it's easy to drive to the convenience stores in Maplewood Square. But those stores are not at a convenient walking distance from us. Not everyone wants or needs to get in to their car to buy a quart of milk or a paper. The neighborhood needs its own store. Mr. Hussein has kept up the building nicely and has agreed to keep the store environs clean of disposed lottery tickets and other trash. I used to wait for the bus every day when the In-N-Out was open previously and noticed very little, if any, trash in front of the store. And again, that is Brent and Jane Roby from Crescent Lane. And we also had Miss Carol Wallace Orr. And want to come up, Carol? You want me to read it? Okay. So as a neighborhood resident, I, along with almost everyone else in the area, am in favor of reopening the In-N-Out. The objections I heard from a few people at the open meeting at the site last month seemed largely irrelevant. For example, about the zoned speed over which the convenience store has no control. Another objection concerned an increase in trash in the area. Mr. Hussein stated that he would have 2 employees at work in the store, one of whom would be responsible for policing the area to dispose of trash. There is indeed a fair amount of trash on Malden's streets, most of which can be blamed on the unusually wicked wind, which knocks over trash cans and blows the contents all over the place. It's nice to know that, unlike many other residents, Mr. Hussein would take responsibility for keeping his property in the surrounding area picked up. In my opinion, Mr. Hussein is honest and responsible, and our neighborhood would benefit from having his store reopened. Carol Orr on Crescent Lane. I think that's the extent of the information that came in. I do have some in opposition, but we're going to continue on with folks that want to support. And so anyone would like to speak? Mr. Kamel?
David Kamel, 35 Williams Street, Ward 6 Councilor. So I will try to keep it short. I don't want to be redundant. A lot of what I wanted to say was already covered by the attorney. But I do want to ask one thing. I spoke with Commissioner Miller today, and I just want to start out, if you don't mind, I just want to read a little excerpt from 700.1.5. So this isn't the whole thing, this is just an excerpt from it. When an application is filed regarding a non-conforming building, structure, or use where the building is currently vacant or the use is inactive, this period will be determined by the Board of Appeal per petition filed in accordance with the provisions of section 800.4.1.3. And so, and I don't know if you have any written material directly from the building commissioner in front of you, but he didn't characterize it as a denial. He actually said, he referenced this section and said, it's you, it's not him. He said he would only grant the application if he could absolutely confirm, you know, that say that he knew something was open a month ago and was just reopening. He said he would tell anybody applying when he sees that it is inactive, that in any case that he was in doubt, he would just refer it to you. So he's not, again, this is from my discussion with him on the phone today, did not necessarily determine that it was a denial. He is deferring it to the Board of Appeals per this ordinance. So that's the way he explained it to me today. So I don't know if you have something in the file that might mirror that.
Not the characterization from the
Okay.
I
conversation.
have the ordinance right here.
No, but
Right.
you're talking about his interpretation.
Yeah, just his interpretation. And he says he would have been here tonight. He teaches a class tonight.
Right,
so
no,
that's
I'm
just
aware of
how-
that,
so.
yeah.
So there's two other things I wanted, so that was the validity, I just wanted to cover that real quick. The neighborhood impact, I think the letter from the letters you read really cover a lot of what the neighborhood feels. And we've heard that, no other use is going to be really possible there. Anything that would happen would have to come here for variances, for dimensional controls. So any which way you cut it, it's going to be in control of, the folks here are going to be in control of that, the destiny of it. And so I'll never say never, but it's going to be quite a long time before anything besides an appeal or variance can affect that. I don't see the council or the planning board making any provisions that are going to allow for a lot size of that small to be used for anything. So I think this is one of the small number of areas in the city that has an unintended consequence. I think there's a handful, and I don't think this would set any precedent to have you interpret that because it was out of his control, that it's not the same situation as another business that just wasn't open, that they closed it down for no discernible reason. And I would just say many more people that I've spoken to, there are some in opposition, but many more that I've spoken to are in favor of it. And besides my one-on-one conversations, I think anybody you talk to from that meeting that night would say the same thing, that there was just more support for it to be open. Hopefully we'll hear some folks tonight. And the conditions that were already covered, I'll just go over them again. Minimum of 3 times daily to pick up the litter. Per suggestion of the Malden PD, the video system that also operates has nighttime operation. And then the petitioner agrees not to seek a beer and wine license. That was a big deal for a lot of the neighbors, so the petitioner has agreed not to do that. So I would ask for you to allow this to open. Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor of the variance being granted? Come on. Just if you would, your name and address for the record that we maintain.
My name's Gordon Doherty. I live at 477 Lebanon Street, directly abutting the bus turnaround and then the property in question. When it was open as a convenience store, there were people there, they maintained the property, trash was collected on a regular basis, there was activity there. Since it's been gone, people throw garbage behind the building. There's been a rat problem because nobody has been around to maintain the place because there's no activity there. I think it's detrimental to the neighborhood not to have something there, because if he isn't there, he can't sell the place because nobody's going to buy it unless they can do something with it, which means it's not going to be maintained, which is going to become an eyesore in the neighborhood. And I think that having him back there would boost the maintaining area, along with, I have to occasionally call the MBTA because their property gets out of control. And they have to come and maintenance it because they don't pay attention to it unless I call them. But with him in the building, he maintains his property. They come by more often because they have an obligation to keep their side of it clean too. So I think that would be a plus in that area. Thank you for your time.
Did you say you were at 474?
477.
Okay, yep, so we are here. You got the T lot right next to you.
Yes.
That L goes around.
Yep.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else to speak in favor? I thought you said 474. Oh, you did.
Hi, Councilor Barbara Murphy, 28 Forest Street, Malden, Massachusetts. This is one of those situations where you kind of have a divided group, some for, some against. Would like to go on record as saying that a number of months ago, I was at the planning board when there was a petition to change it was a joint ordinance planning meeting to change this particular area from Residence A to Residence C. I spoke vehemently against that because that would have been detrimental to the neighborhood. Because the only way for this particular property to actually be viable again is to either go into Residence C, where an in-and-out convenience or convenience store would be allowed, but would allow potential development of a neighborhood with apartment buildings, which is not what I wanted to see. My goal as a city councilor is and always will be to protect the neighborhoods. So trying to change the zoning was not something that I could actually ever get behind. And there were a number of other people who spoke that evening against that also. So after that happened, now we're left with a building that's vacant, similar to McFadden Manor, which I dealt with for a number of years. What do you do with a vacant building? People will say to you, I'd like to see a park there. And I would have loved to have seen a park on the McFadden Manor property. Love to see a pocket park down there. But it's not something that's viable in today's economy. It's not something the city can afford. It's not something that's going to happen. So now you have to stop and think, what do we do with this? As you've heard tonight, it is an undersized piece of property for a home. 7,500 square feet is the minimum requirement these days to be able to build a single-family home. And even if you got a variance, who would want to build a home where the MBTA had a right-of-way behind their building? So that has not been raised either. So that's another impediment to what do we do with this building. The night of the meeting, as I said, there were people there for, there were people there against. And I did say to the people against, what bothers you? What would make you maybe not happy about this opening, but what would make it less impactful to you should this store open? And out of that discussion came basically the issues that we heard tonight that were brought up by Attorney McDonald and also reiterated by Ward 6 Councilor Kamel. And it is the fact the trash was a huge problem. Okay, the trash is a problem today because they're not open also, but because of Keno, as we all know, nips, things like that, trash does accumulate. The owner has agreed to do, I think, quite a bit of trash control. There was many years ago, the owner did go for a beer and wine license. There was a petition that was signed by over, I believe, I'm going to say 100, and I think Bill will probably, I think over 100 people. They did not want to see a beer and wine license. They did not want to see any liquor at that store. So that was actually shot down at the liquor board. The owner has agreed not to ask for a beer and wine or a liquor license moving forward. Security is a huge issue. He has agreed to have in and outside security cameras, keep a DVD that will be accessible to the police department. So now we come to a decision. What do you do? Do you leave this as a vacant piece of property that really has no future? Okay, and aside from that, probably impacts the livelihood of the actual individual who owns it? Or do we find a way to make this a vibrant, well-run store that benefits the neighborhood? I am here to say that, having looked at, could a daycare go there? Could a church go there? I went through the same thing with McFadden Manor. What is the least detrimental impact to the neighborhood? A vacant store, a daycare, a church, or a vibrant variety store that's going to serve the needs of the neighborhood. I would say that I am in favor of the store reopening. I know that I probably have a few constituents behind me who aren't going to vote for me because I'm saying this, but I do believe that in the best interest of the city of Malden and the neighborhood, that is the best use for this particular piece of property. So thank you.
Councilor, 2 questions.
Yes.
the meeting you referred to when you heard opposition, are you referring to a month ago, the neighborhood meeting, or when it went before a planning ordinance a couple of years ago?
It was at the neighborhood meeting,
Okay.
and that was at the point where there was a lot of, back and forth
Right.
between people who really were in favor of people who were really against it. So at that point, I said to the folks, okay, the folks who are opposed to this, tell me what really bothers you about this particular store opening. And that's when we got into the discussion about really, I believe, beside the fact that change is difficult, okay? It changed when the store closed, and some people were unhappy, but it's been very quiet there, okay? It is a difficult intersection. I will not dispute that with anyone. I have barrels out there trying to slow the speed of people coming around the corner because they crash into houses. So in addition to the additional activity from a vehicular point of view that will be caused by the store opening, there is definitely a traffic concern in that area. I have been working with Lip, our city engineer, to try to come up with a plan to try to mitigate some of the traffic concerns that are caused in that particular roadway. I'm not going to lie and say that the convenience store being closed, has been good for that piece. It has. More traffic activity will increase the issues in that particular curve. That's I believe, a true statement. But as I said, I am working with the city engineer. We're looking at maybe getting this particular area into the Complete Streets program. And we also talked last week just about the barrels have, I'm digressing here a little bit, but the barrels have helped slow down traffic. That most of the residents will agree with that. And it's also shown us the traffic pattern of in and out from the side streets. And we're actually Yem and I have been Mr. Lip and I have been talking about actually putting in, if you go and you see the bike lanes, you'll see poles that actually, when you snowplow, they go down and they come back up. We're actually talking about looking at implementing some of these poles in that area that would replace the barrels. So.
My second question.
Yes, I'm sorry, long-winded, sorry.
What was the motivation to, the attempt to change to residency? Was that specifically to address the property we're discussing?
Yes, it was.
And how wide was the?
It was wide. It went, I don't know the exact area, but it also, we actually had Melrose aldermen at the meeting, voting against it. Someone could actually, with the price of homes these days, if they bought up the homes, they would have the right to put in a 3-story apartment building.
But the zoning change that was going to impact multiple was singularly for that property?
I would say, whether it was singularly for that property or not, it came to us, and it would have allowed that property to reopen, which was not something that, as a counselor, I could support, because I believe that was detrimental to the neighborhood. And I bring that up because I believe that leaving this property vacant is detrimental to the neighborhood. And I would think that this is a much better solution than the prior
So we have various
request.
forms of detriment.
We have various forms of detriment. Yes. Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor?
Hi, good evening. My name is Carol Desiderio. I live at 440 Lebanon Street. I'm not a direct abutter, but I'm diagonally across the street from the store. We miss having the store in the neighborhood, and I don't want to be repetitive to what was already stated in those very well-written letters of support that you read earlier tonight, but I wanted to come on record as being in support of opening this store again, because I was not available to come to the meeting in December. I will say that I think that the neighborhood misses the store. I had a ton of people ask me throughout the years when it first closed down, what happens to the store? Are they going to open again? It's not helpful to have an empty building in the city. Malden's got too many empty storefronts as it is already, especially in the downtown area. The neighborhoods, if we can help to keep them alive and revitalize the neighborhoods, that's what we want. We don't want empty storefronts, especially in a situation where there's nothing else you can do with this building. I certainly wouldn't support a apartments or a house of worship there, as Councilor Murphy said. One of the things, it's my understanding, that was discussed extensively at the meeting in December was the traffic patterns. And I gotta tell you, I lived in my house, I remember that store when it was Richdale, when I was a kid. I've lived in my house now where I am at 440 Lebanon Street for 12 years. I've seen the traffic with the store. I've seen the traffic with the store being closed. The traffic is horrible in that corner. I don't think it's the store's fault for that. We've been trying to work with the city. Councilor Murphy's been wonderful for a number of years now, trying to slow down this traffic on that corner. I don't think it has anything to do with the store. And I don't think that the shopkeeper of the store or the owner of the store should be penalized for the way that people drive around that corner. So I just want to reiterate my support in reopening this store again, not having empty storefronts in the city, and supporting our neighborhood to kind of stay alive. I will actually say one more thing. I do remember a number of years back when they went for the liquor license in that store, and the neighbors, especially my next door neighbor, was very much opposed to it. I personally could have gone either way with the beer and wine license in that store. It wasn't something that was meaningful to me one way or the other, so for that reason, I supported my neighborhood in the way that they felt when they said that they didn't want it. I figured if it didn't matter to me one way or the other, I could at least support my neighbors, and so I did that. I'm coming out to this meeting tonight to say that I do feel very strongly about this. I do have an opinion, and I am in very much support, regardless of what may or may not have unfolded in the second half of this meeting. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor?
Good evening. My name is Joseph Gray. I live at 295 Real Lebanon Street in Malden. And I just want to toss in a tiny sort of technical enhancement to some of the traffic issues that have been talked about tonight concerning that corner and that store. Something that came up during the discussion at the neighborhood meeting, I believe it was last month, that I brought up, that we talked over concerning traffic and parking. And I made the specific point that people who lived in the area, a lot of abutting neighbors, extensively parked at that store over the years that it's been closed. And it's been very crowded. Some days when I drive by, I see 5, 6 vehicles in the morning parked in front of that store. So now there's an issue, well, would there be a lot more traffic issues if the store was open? And I'm looking at it, I'm saying, well, there's nearly a half dozen vehicles parked in front of the store going in and out anyways while it's closed. You know, to my mind, to my thinking, that creates similar traffic issues, whether it's open or closed. People are going to park in that spot. The store does not own the parking spaces in front of the building. That's city property. So there's whether the store is open or not, there's no restrictions at all that I can tell from people using that space to park. And when they pull out into fast-moving traffic going around that corner, you know, it doesn't matter. On balance, I believe the store is a good thing. I'm not making any suggestions about restricting parking in front of the store to patrons because you can't. The city owns the street, not the store. But I hope I'm making some sort of sense as far as I don't see much difference with the traffic issues in that area, whether the store is open or not. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak? Seeing none, we'll open it up for folks that want to not have us approve the variance. And again, I have one lengthy letter from one resident, and then I have a list of folks that signed a statement. So I believe I should be reading both of these. So the list, we the neighbors of the In-N-Out convenience store are opposed to the store being reopened. So we have, and I apologize if I can't read the writing, but it looks like at 446 Lebanon Street, the Hineses, John and Kathleen. At 444 Lebanon, Maureen. Sorry, I just can't read the writing. 446 Singer, Richard Singer. 424 Lebanon, Ken Croffins. At 424 Lebanon, Sebastian Paquette. At 410 Lebanon, Corey Enright. 413 Lebanon, Dave Brogat. 487 Lebanon, Claire Shanley. 6 Morton Ave, Richard Osterland. 6 Morton Ave, Priscilla Osterland. 512 Lebanon Street, Robert Palouse. And also at 512, Terry Luz Palusi. 4 Wilbur Street, cannot read the name. 2 Wilbur Street, Malalda Poloni. 6 Morton Ave, another Osterland, Megan. And 24 Marshall Street, both Barbara and Richard Purcell. Again, I apologize for any mispronunciations. And then we had one lengthy letter from a resident, and this would be from Mr. Neil Kinnan, 11 Spruce Street. I write to you regarding the docket items in front of you regarding parcel number 138788806, Malden, Lebanon Street, Malden, Mass, requesting variance under ordinance chapter 12, section 800-4-1-3 and section 700.1.5. I am opposed to providing these variances for the following reasons. The petitioner came before the Malden Planning Board over a year ago, after having his store closed for well over 2 years, acknowledging the zoning ordinance and that he had exceeded the 2-year requirement, parentheses, nearly 3 at the time, close parentheses, of section 700.1.5 of chapter 12, and thus was attempting to have an entire section of Lebanon Street rezoned in order to allow him to reopen his former store instead. It was an attempt at an end around. With the majority of the people in attendance opposed that evening, he was rejected by the planning board. Point 2, having been rejected under the attempt in front of the planning board, and given that his initial rejection for zoning change occurred over a year ago, and the fact the petitioner clearly at that time claimed that all was cleaned up, he should further be rejected in his appeal before the Board of Appeal, as another year plus has gone by and nothing was done, when obviously no hardship existed nearly a year and a half ago. The time for an appeal on this situation at any time after the 2 years is dubious at best, but after nearly 5 years, which was stated in his meeting held at the store location in the last few weeks of December, seems way beyond the point of reason if Malden is to ever uphold this ordinance in the future. Point 3. Further, under Chapter 12, Section 800.4.9, I believe either of the variances must be rejected, given as an unfavorable action regarding this parcel was already determined in zoning, and the fact that it was denied reopening due to the current ordinance regarding 2 years having elapsed, which the petitioner acknowledged in front of the planning board when it applied to rezone, and again in the meeting with the neighbors on December 12th, 2018. YouTube video, which I sent to Chairman O'Brien, see petitioner attorney's statement at 2 minutes, 15 seconds, 2:30 of the video. Chapter 12, section 800.4-9 states that given an unfavorable action, unless after serving notice to the parties of interest at the time and place of the proceedings, 8 of the 9 members of the planning board consent thereto. This has not occurred. 4, it has been stated in meetings with residents, see YouTube video, that this property cannot be effectively used as anything. In fact, it could certainly be turned into an apartment or two with variances granted for that. This has indeed occurred at similar business properties in the recent past. One example comes to mind at 840 Main Street that was formerly Yankee Pest Control on the corner of Winter and Main Street. It is now a residential dwelling with only 1,507 square feet of land in a far larger convertible building. The idea that nobody would live there is simply not factual. Finally, as I write to you as a former counselor who spoke against changing the zoning and reopening this store after 2 years at the planning board meeting where the attempted rezoning the area was defeated, I have great concern as a citizen that granting this entity a variance so long past the 2 years will have far-reaching unintended consequences for issues that have come before the planning board and the appeals board in the past. For instance, the Malden hospital site. And if granted, this will set a precedent, partly because the time elapsed is so long that legal challenges will be extremely difficult to defeat given the subjective nature of overriding the current 2-year limit based upon one person's hardship. The appeals board is likely to put the city and itself into a situation of testifying as to why one person's subjective hardship, to go beyond 2 years, is not equivalent to another person's subjective hardship. A situation for those who have ever testified in court. One does not wish to be in that position. I appreciate the difficulty of your job and the work that you folks do. And that's signed by Neil Kinnan, 11 Spruce Street. That was the written information I received, and now we would ask if there's any folks that would like to speak. Again, this is in opposition to the variance.
Hi, my name is Sarah Liberman. I live at 3 Swains Pond Ave in Melrose, Malden, 33 Malden. I just want to say I'm not opposed to the store opening. When I moved in the neighborhood, the store was there and it was fine. I'm only up here to say that if the store reopens, I'm just concerned about security. Because there was, a lot, people like to rob convenience stores and the security in the neighborhood, that's all. I'm not opposed to it opening again. When I moved in the neighborhood, it was there, and that's fine. Live and let live, but that's all I want to say, is that I hope security is.
And would it be a comfort and acceptable with, we've heard from the counselor, the attorney,
No, I know the security
and from Chief
cameras,
Molis's
right.
recommendation for
cameras,
some
yeah.
cameras to be.
Absolutely, but I know that, I don't know why convenience stores are such a target for people to rob, but
Right.
I remember over the years, there have been definitely, unfortunately, break-ins in the store.
Sure.
And stuff, and I'm sure after they do their business, they leave the neighborhood, but being in the neighborhood, that's just a concern of mine about.
Okay.
Anyway, but
thanks
that's
for
fine.
expressing
I'm not saying the store shouldn't reopen or anything
Okay.
like that.
Thank you for expressing.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Board members, any other questions or comments? And again, no one else to speak? Okay. Anyone want to make a motion?
Are we going to handle these separately?
My thought was to address, yes, my thought was to address initially the building inspectors, the request by the petitioner, I should say, to overturn the building inspector's ruling, and then depending on the result of that, whether we would need to go forward and give consideration to the other petition.
handling that one first about his decision, I think that, basically that we support his decision not to grant a permit based on the evidence that he had before him.
Okay, so if you speak into the mic, you would be making a motion to support the
Support.
building inspector in not overturning his decision,
Based on the evidence that he had.
the evidence that the building inspector had. Okay. And would there be a second?
I actually want to kind of amend that a bit. I think it's based on the evidence that we find, based on the rule. I mean, I don't think Nelson made a determination on that one way or the other. So I think it's really based on the evidence that came from
Other
our
than
state.
the fact that he didn't issue a permit
Yeah,
to the,
so-
to the
All right,
applicant.
We can just cut that part off then. and we'll
Yeah.
just- Based on his decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we support his decision.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we have a vote of 5-0 to uphold the building inspector's decision. And now we can entertain the other petition that was submitted. And would there be a motion? Anyone entertain a motion on that one?
And then we could discuss it a little bit, but I mean, I think, based on what we've heard here tonight, this is a unique situation. It may not be necessarily, some of it is related to the land in one sense, but some of it is beyond everyone's control here. And that the length of time, we heard from the attorney, this is a long motion. Let me just make the motion instead of making comments. I'd like to move that we grant a variance and allow for them to reopen the store.
With conditions?
With conditions, which would be the three that they have already agreed to, which is to have the trash policed 3 times per day, that the video surveillance be installed,
That's acceptable to?
acceptable to Chief Mullis,
Okay.
and that they, at no time would the store apply for a liquor license.
Yeah, you know, and I meant to ask that question if the gentleman had applied in the past at all. I know I did hear that someone applied in the past, but was it our petitioner?
It was, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So
But he was denied, so.
Okay.
And he's agreeing now not to seek
Okay,
any.
all right. And Councilor Murphy, you had a comment?
I'm terribly sorry.
No, no.
There was also one other condition that was not mentioned this evening.
Oh, please.
That just came to mind, and I'm sorry I didn't have my notes in front of me.
Would that be the hours?
It was the hours.
Yeah. I had
Yes,
it.
that.
I did watch YouTube.
That that the store, there was a concern that the store close at 9 o'clock and
and I
not be open till 10 or 11.
I think I had a birthday yesterday, so my memory.
Okay, thank you. I mean,
I
I'm sorry.
think I heard 9 p.m.
Yeah, 9 p.m., yes.
Is that everyone? So,
Yes, thank you, I'm sorry.
someone raising their hand? Someone want to speak? No? Okay. I thought I heard 9 p.m. at your meeting.
Yeah, my apologies to Councilor Murphy and the board. That was a condition that was discussed.
Right, and I remember he agreed that it
It
wouldn't
is
be an
agreed
issue.
to by the
Yeah.
petitioner, so.
Okay. So, John, now
And
that I
that
interrupted you. Huh?
business hours not extend beyond 9 p.m.
Okay, and that's all 7 days, or days that you're open. And there was a number of hardships that were mentioned in lot size and both in configuration and the pure size of it, lack of parking. A second? I will. I'll sec, okay, and all those in favor? I'm in favor. Adam?
I'm opposed.
Okay, so it's granted by a vote of 4-1 with those conditions. So we ended up with 4, right? Security system, no liquor application, store hours, and the trash policing. Okay? All right, thank you, folks. Pat, I'm going to give you a little break, and I'm going to do our other hearing now, the sign, and then we'll do your other one. Okay? We'll take a minute, and the pastor for the sign. That would be Main Street. Yeah. let me ask Adam something here, though. So are you,
Oh, yeah, as long as you guys are, too. You give me, yeah, absolutely. No. I do it all the time. I write stuff all the time that I don't agree with. But no, you guys get the final say. Make sure I'm getting your thoughts, right? I think I understand it, but.
okay, this is, Maine. I need a second. Here we go. Excuse me, folks, we're going to have another hearing. If you guys don't mind, could you go out to the lobby? Thank you. So this is our second hearing, and it is petition of the First Baptist Church of Malden for a variance of section 3.35.13.2, Chapter 3 of the Revised Ordinances of 1991, as amended of the City of Malden sign control ordinances, namely to reconstruct and increase dimensions of existing sign at the property known as 493 Main Street, Malden, and also known by City Assessor Parcel ID map 074260001. In just one second. Catherine, did you get the book for the signs? Did you get a zoning book? Yeah, I just realized that. We'll get one for you and give you a peek at it right now, if you would. And also in our ad, and from my site visit today, it's two signs, as the pastor explained to me. I noticed in our legal notice here, it says existing sign, singular. So I just want to clarify that. And with that, this gentleman is...
Good evening. My name's Andy Lehman with Sign Art, here representing First Baptist Church. And we're looking for relief from the ordinance for the square footage. Existing sign is 6 square feet, and we're looking to bump it up to 18 square feet. And the reason is the hardship that church is going through. They need to take in new denominations in order to keep viable. So they need to add all those names onto the sign, and within the 6 square foot, you wouldn't even be able to like read the names. So that's why we're looking for the increase in the size.
Okay, so I did visit today with a pastor, and it's on, property's on a corner lot, so it's allowed, I believe, to have 2 signs, and the posts are remaining, and we're taking down the 2 current and putting brand-new ones up.
Yes.
And the ones going up are going to be, could you give us the dimensions of existing pre and post? Like, 30, 48 both currently,
yeah,
and the new?
48-inch wide. Both of them are staying 48-inch
Okay,
wide.
so it's just the depth?
Yeah, the height of the sign.
Height.
Yeah. So
And-
the existing one is 24 inches high,
And,
and we're looking to go to 55 inches high. And I know it sounds like a lot, but we're adding 4 more denominations in there, along with the Boy Scouts. And those panels are only like 8 inches high. Any smaller than that, you probably wouldn't even be able to read the names of the churches
right,
from this street. So
Yeah.
that's the reason for the,
and it's a pretty, not only active, but the intersection there, it's 5 or
Yes.
so streets converge together, and...
matter of fact, when they first called me, they said, we need to redo our signs, and I said, what signs? I I didn't even, they were so small.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions from the board members?
It's not going to be lighted,
Nope, no lights.
no lights.
No.
And materials, wood?
The new signs that are gonna be attached to the existing poles, excuse me, they're gonna be, all aluminum pan, so it's not gonna rot, not gonna cup, you know, so it'll look good for a long time.
Anyone else? Questions?
And if this isn't granted, they'd be allowed to build them as is that correct? The same
I
existing?
believe so.
Yeah, the commissioner said we could redo them as long as we didn't, without a permit, or with the permit, his approval, the same size as it is, but there would be no way that you'd be able to read the names of the churches.
And they are going to continue to use the footprints, the
Yeah,
post
yeah.
that's been established. So it's really the, I called it depth, but you called it height on the
Yeah,
sign.
the height of the sign.
Yeah.
That's.
The width
that's
is
it.
the same,
Width
48.
stays the same at
Yep.
48.
Anyone else? Questions? No? Anyone from the public that would like to speak in support? I do have a couple letters to read in also. And since Barbara Murphy got up, I'm going to let her speak, and then I'll read my letters. I just don't want to forget them.
Thank you. Once again, Barbara Murphy, the Ward 5 City Councilor. I'm here to speak in support of this. I am on the Sign Design Committee and have been for I'm going to say 5 or 6 years now. We had a new sign ordinance that we put into effect, one of which pieces of it was that would allow something that didn't fit in within our ordinance, our sign ordinance, to come before the Board of Appeals, which has been very good. Because working with the sign ordinances throughout the city, it's done by zone, and it's very difficult to determine each and every situation that comes before us and find the right dimension for a certain particular occupancy or building. This particular sign is, it's a very tastefully designed sign. It fits in with the demeanor of downtown Malden and the church itself. It is contained within the current footprint. It is just higher. That height, unfortunately, is restricted because of it's actually the church is in Residence A, which has kind of thrown it into a very odd situation. In any other situation, it would be allowed. I do not believe that it would add I believe it would actually help the church to, for its parishioners to know the different services that are there. It's, as I said, very tasteful. It's not exceedingly large. It is something I think that will once again be beneficial not only to the church but to any parishioner that would like to know the services that are going on there, and that I would hope that you would look at this favorably, because as I said, the sign design ordinance itself, it's very difficult to craft an ordinance that takes into consideration every single type of issue that comes before us. And that's why we on the sign design are very happy that we have you now to be able to change some of the decisions we have to make because we have to follow that ordinance. So I would, once again, I know that everyone on sign design, there was no one who was in opposition to this sign. So that's all I would like to say. Thank you very much for hearing me.
So I have a few letters I'm going to read in, and then if there's any folks to speak in favor, they will come up, and after that, if there's anyone opposed. So the first one is from another councilor, Peg Crow, and she is writing to respectfully ask that she's addressed it to the board, ask you to vote in favor of the First Baptist Church petition for a variance of the sign control ordinances. As you know, the First Baptist Church has been part of the community for over 200 years and has been a solid community partner. The sign proposed is proportional to the land size. It fits into the landscaping of the property and is welcoming to all. The petitioner is proposing to replace an existing sign with one that is easy to read, informs the community of other parishioner groups, and is an upgrade to the existing sign. I do feel this project meets the required findings necessary to grant a variance of section 3.35.13.2, chapter 3 of the signed ordinances. Again, thank you for your time. I'm hopeful for a positive outcome, and I'm again stating that I'm 100% in support of the board granting this variance. Secondly, we have from another councilor from Ward 4, Mr. Ryan O'Malley, who I thought I saw here earlier, and he's asking the board to vote favorably on granting the variance. Writing to express my support of the petition to replace the sign at the First Baptist Church at the corner of Main and Salem Streets. The existing sign is falling apart and is in desperate need of replacement. The proposed sign is pleasing to the eye and highlights the diverse nature of the services provided at the First Baptist Church. In addition, the sign is in the vicinity of commercial properties that have sign many times the size of the proposed sign. Respectfully request that you grant this petition. Then we have one last letter, and that is from the Malden Historical Society.
Commission?
I'm sorry?
The commission?
Commission? Correct. At its meeting on January 10th, 2019, the Malden Historical Commission reviewed the proposed new freestanding accessory sign at the First Baptist Church. The commission has no concerns with the proposal as it relates to the property, which is recognized for its architectural and historical significance as an individual property and as part of the Converse Square and Salem Street civic area, as documented in the attached survey and inventory forms on file with the State Historical Commission. The Commission appreciates the opportunity to review the proposal, and again, we're supporting it. They did include a lot of historical data on this property, along with a couple of other properties in that area that have that designation of historical significance. That would complete the letters of support. Would there be anyone else here to speak in support of the sign? Pastor?
I'm Reverend Martha Dominy, pastor of the First Baptist Church, and I reside at 36 Wesboro Road in Malden. The First Baptist Church is historic. We were organized in 1803. We've been located on the corner of what is currently known as Main and Salem Streets since 1843. Our current building was constructed in the late 1880s because the congregation was growing so large it needed a larger building. Unfortunately, the congregation today does not need that large a building. So we have chosen to share our space with other organizations in the community, three of which are immigrant congregations. And those are what are listed on this proposed sign. And they have been very emphatic. Well, let me back up for a moment. In the last couple of years, I've received requests from organizations that share space. We also sponsor Boy Scout Troop 603, and we also provide the meal site for Bread of Life. But some of those groups have approached me and wanting to put their own sign on our lawn and not wanting to see a plethora of signs on the lawn. Our goal was to design one sign that would meet everyone's needs. We knew that we needed to replace our sign, but we also wanted to try and meet the needs of the other churches especially, and the troop. The churches, because they are immigrant congregations, felt it was very important to have the name of their church in their own language. And I felt it was very important that we have it in English as well, so that the Malden community that only reads English knows what is going on in the church building, as well as those that are reading only their foreign language would know that they could attend programming there. We also felt it was important that our own church be listed, saying that we have a church still there, we do have a congregation, and we are providing programs in English. Our Boy Scout troop also has asked for signage so that they could recruit members, so that people in the community would know there's a Boy Scout troop in Malden Square that boys would be able to attend. So again, that was our purpose. We do need these congregations, we do need these other organizations to share our space. You're looking for a hardship. Our congregation is much smaller than it was when the building was first built. And trying to accommodate and use the space wisely and to share it with others. The city of Malden values and is very proud of its diversity. And I believe this sign depicts part of that diversity in the city. Thank you.
Ma'am, can I
Yes.
ask you just to repeat one point?
Sure.
You had mentioned about the size of the building. I think at one point it was, I think at one point it fit you and now it doesn't. Can you just repeat that? Would you just repeat
It's a
that point?
large building that we don't have enough population in our congregation to use. So therefore, we've rented space out. Previously, part of the basement was used for TRICAP and ABCD Head Start programming. Right now, it's vacant. We're looking for a tenant.
Yeah.
But we do have Bread of Life, Boy Scouts. We have had a Cub Scout pack there as well. And in addition, on the main program floors, having these other churches use space as well, meeting both their needs, our needs, but also their needs of having a space. I get invitations at least every month, if not weekly, from churches looking for space to rent, even just a small classroom. They're looking for a space, not in a home, but they want it in a public religious building to worship in.
Reverend, a question and a comment. Comment is that you mentioned how the various churches you've chosen to and want to display both their name in English and so that certainly would contribute to the need to expand the
That's
size
correct.
for the additional lettering.
That's part of why the sign is as large as it is.
Okay.
Is
And-
due to the both languages.
Right. And the only other was really a question, whether it was a typo or is there the Boy Scouts, is the coloring different on the Boy Scouts for a particular reason?
Because they're not a congregation,
Yeah.
we chose to do it that way just to show that they were a separate organization,
Okay.
not one of the churches.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
I'm sorry.
Let me turn you on now. Okay, there you go.
So the sign that we have a photo of that's proposed, with all of the panels on it, that represents congregations as well as the Boy Scout troop who currently rent space or have an agreement with you to utilize the church. Does that maximize the use of your facility, or will it be perhaps points in time where panels will be added to the?
No, well, we're not planning that. If one of them leaves, we might want to switch out, but we're not planning to add anybody else. No.
Thank you.
Okay.
No one else? Did you have Catherine? Catherine? Okay, shut that thing off. Okay, would there be anyone else to speak in support? Sure, come up, sir. Which one is it?
Good evening. My name is Matt Byrne. I live at 80 Cross Street. I'm the Scout Master for Malden Troop 603. I've been for 3 years. I just want to say that I'm speaking in support of the variance for the proposed sign. It'll directly support our organization. Reverend Domini mentioned that it will help people recognize that there is a troop meeting in town. It'll have a positive effect on the future of scouting in Malden. Scouting has a rich history in Malden. One of the things that Reverend Domini didn't mention is that the First Baptist Church in Malden can lay claim to continuously sponsoring a Boy Scout troop for 108 years. It's as long as scouting has existed in the United States. That's something that not many organizations can claim. So it's a rich history for scouting in this city with the First Baptist Church. We make a valuable contribution to this city, citywide. We are, a very vibrant organization, active in all sorts of events around the city. I hope you are aware of that. Don't need to go into detail, but scouting faces a number of challenges these days, not the least of which is getting new recruits. It's very important for us to get awareness in town, and this sign will make a big difference in people being aware of our organization. If the variance is not permitted, my understanding is that the troop will not have recognition on the lawn there, and so that will be something that will make a difference to us in remaining a functional, valuable part of this community. It will help us tremendously, and I hope that you will consider that in your deliberation.
Thank you. Sir, you know what, we were gabbing here, and when you started, we missed your name and address. Could you just, for the record?
Matt Byrne, 80 Cross Street.
B-Y-R-N-E?
B-U-R-N-E.
Thank you. 80 Cross. Anyone else to speak? Okay. Hi.
Hi, my name is Young Chen Wang. I'm the owner for 1 Salem Street.
1 Salem Street?
Yes, just diagonal to
Yep, the beautiful building, yeah.
Yeah. Even I have a little bit of concern about the size too high, you know, because from 24 to 50 to 54, right? And plus the foot is pretty high. But I still like to support this variance. There are a couple reasons. Number one, the church is a non-profit organization. Number two, we have pretty good neighborhood. Number three, as you know, the people said they contribute to the city. So I like to support it.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm from 9 Bickford Road.
9 Bickford Road?
Yes.
Right around the corner, yep.
Yes.
And what's your name?
We have issue like about the...
Your name?
My name is Mahmoud Aburubiya.
Just spell that for us.
Yes, M-A-H-M-O-U-D.
Slow.
Yes. Last name. Last name is A-B-U-R-U-B-I-E-H.
A-B-U-R-U-B-I-E-H. All right, great.
Yes, we keep on fighting for the road in 9 Bickford Road between the church and all the way end of 9 Bickford Road. The road is like bad road. We keep on talking about to fix the road, you know.
The public street, Bickford?
Yes.
Well, that would be the Department of Public Works.
Yes, and also this is what you say about the church is a lot of people like driving, going out like speeding sometimes,
Sure.
you know. And no people like stop, they keep on speeding down there.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know, but another things like we keep on asking to fix that road.
Right.
Is that sometimes they come in the city, fix a little bit, you know, they
Right.
fix the damage. But we have this issue for a little long time. I keep on talking to the city and
You have?
they are nice,
Who'd
you know.
Who'd
they
you
said-
speak with?
I spoke to Mr. Bob, the
Knox?
yes.
Yeah, that's the appropriate
Yeah, he
person.
told me, one time they came, the electric company, they damaged the whole street, they opened
Okay.
you make it a big hole, you know.
We want to get back to this, though. Are you speaking on behalf or supporting or
Yes,
opposing?
I have my own neighbor here also.
Okay,
They are-
but as far as the public street, that's
Yes,
for another night, another department, and, yeah. But I appreciate you pointing it out.
thank you so much.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not sure what, go ahead. I'm not sure what that was. Hi.
Hi there, I'm Michael Huddy, H-U-D-D-Y, from 10 Crawford Street. Sorry. I represent the church as Vice Moderator and Chair of the Board of Property Trustees. And I just want to echo what Reverend Dominy and Councilor Murphy have said. I think they've said it all very well. As you saw, the signs themselves are in really bad shape. As part of the Board of Property Trustees, we're charged for upkeep, and so it's been on our radar for a while. And I think the opportunity to have a better-looking sign, a tasteful sign, as Councilor Murphy said, that helps represent the organizations using our space will benefit all of us as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. And anyone else would like to speak in favor? Hi.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pastor, for renting the space for us. So before we came to the First Baptist Church here, we rented a very small single family for modern student Bible fellowship. And then we have to expand because the Bible study fellowship started with 3 families. And then we have already have like 20 students who live in Malden. So we do appreciate Pastor to give us this space. And I want to show you this and also show you guys this. Because if you read this, so this is if you go to the clinic, this is the doctors, will use this chart to check your eyesight. And this is yi. This is yi, very easy to recognize. It's visible. But same pronunciation in Chinese, yi. It's very hard. Look at this. So I'll say this size is pretty small for Chinese. We need like double or even triple the size if it's possible. Yes, this is very reasonable. So you can read the same yi in Chinese. This is why we say we strongly support the pastor to increase the size of this sign. Thank you very much.
Okay, hold on. Just go back to the mic if you would.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
okay. So are you with one of the organizations?
Yeah, the Chinese, yes, the part, yes.
Nepal?
Yeah, the
Oh, I
Chinese,
see.
it's...
Chinese, the bottom one, okay. I see it now, yep. And we didn't get your name and address, so would
Okay,
you give us that?
my
Just
name
spell
is...
it for us.
yeah, okay, my name is Zhang Wei Zhan, Z-H-E-N-W-E-I. Z-H-A-N-G, last name.
Okay.
Address?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so 145C, Pleasant Street, Melrose.
Okay. And you're supporting, and you're also hoping that she might have got even larger signs, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But tonight, we're talking about these. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in support?
Hello, I'm Sian Lin.
Hi.
I live in 3 Bedford Road. Bedford Road, just around here corner.
Bickford, yep. Number
I-
3?
Number 3.
Okay. Did you get a name?
And I don't know, I just moved here for years, a little bit more a year. But my neighbor's street, the span street, come falling down to my backyard. And I don't know how to contact to the owner to cut the tree or whatever. I don't know how to do it that way.
If you, okay, so maybe when we're done here, I can talk to you maybe and help you about identifying who owns what. But we were really hoping you were coming up to talk about this. So are you here to support?
Yes.
Okay, and you're a neighbor, and we got an address of 3 Bickford Road, but I don't know that we got a name.
Zhian, L-I-N, last name.
And you also have a concern with another property in the
Yes,
area?
it's all-
So afterwards, if you want to hang around, I'll talk to you, and I might be able to get you some info.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay? All right. Anyone else to speak? Okay, and anyone to speak in opposition? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to close that portion of the hearing. And would any member would like to make a motion? Okay, Mr. Sullivan is making a motion to grant the variance. Would there be a second? Per the plans that was submitted on the application dated, would you know what the date is? Consistent with the plan submitted and drawn by Andy Lehman dated October 22nd, 2018. And the attached, that the second page gives the dimensions. All right, John? All right, and did we get a second? Okay, all those in favor? All right, so it's granted by a vote of 5-0.
And can we just get the reasoning on the record?
Okay. Okay. That's enough right there, isn't it?
Yeah. No, just in terms of the reasoning for
Yeah.
it, if we all agree on that, is that I think this building is unique. I think it's a large church. It's one that not in a single set congregation.
It skirts a corner and it's high visibility and, okay, would that be enough reason for you?
I'm asking you guys, you all agree with that?
I agree with that. Okay. and they are accommodating a number of other religious and social organizations. All right? Okay. I wanna talk- Can I talk to you, Pastor? Can I talk to you? Pat, 1 minute, okay?
Thank you, guys, thank you so much.
All right. This is the petition of 30 Marvin LLC for a variance of section 400.1.2.3, chapter 12 of the revised ordinances of 1991 as amended of the city of Malden, namely frontage requirements. Specifically, Marvin Street is not an accepted street. And this is as per plans at the property known as 27-29 Marvin, Malden, Mass., and also known by City Assessor Parcel ID 168542244 and Parcel 168542245. Mr. McDonald.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, Patrick McDonald on behalf of the petitioner with offices at 477 Eastern Avenue. This is the petition of 30 Marvin LLC and its principal, Mr. Robert Nakashian, who is here tonight, regarding the property at 27-29 Marvin Street, seeking a variance to allow the construction of a single-family dwelling in a Residence A zoning district on a parcel, actually two parcels of land, which would be combined to total a single 10,000 square foot parcel. This application before the board is required not because of any deficiencies in terms of use or other dimensional controls related to the proposed construction, but solely because of the fact that Marvin Street is a private way, not a public way. The parcel itself has adequate frontage, more than adequate frontage. I believe it's 100 feet pursuant to the plans, but again, on Marvin Street, which is not an accepted way within the city. The proposed structure itself, if the board takes a look at the plans, is completely zoning compliant with respect to all dimensional controls. I would note that there is a key on the site plan that was prepared by the engineer that identifies the various dimensional controls that apply to the structure and the lot. I think the engineer was mistakenly using outdated measurements and amounts under the code. They reference, for instance, 6,000 square feet as a minimum lot size for a single family under the ordinance, which of course we know is no longer the case. But I do suggest to the board—
And it is 7,500?
Currently, single family is 7,500. The combined lots themselves would be 10,000. My point is that notwithstanding the use of outdated dimensional controls and the key in the plan, that this proposed single-family dwelling is entirely zoning compliant with respect to dimensional controls under current zoning. And again, the only the only need to come before this board is because of its frontage on a public way. With respect to the standard for a grant of a variance, I would respectfully suggest to the board, forgive me, I'm getting a bit of a tickle in my throat, that this petitioner meets the, thank you, this petitioner, I think I'll be all right, if you don't mind an occasional cough. I would respectfully suggest the petitioner meets the standard. This lot is unique in two respects that are not common to the zoning district in general. It is on a floodplain, although the issue of the fact that it's a proposed development of floodplain is not something that this board would technically deal with. It is something that the planning board will need to deal with if we are successful in obtaining a variance here on the frontage on a private way issue. This petitioner will then need to seek a special permit from the planning board for the development because of the property lying in a floodplain district.
Will that be the only issue that would need relief at the planning board level?
Again, the need to go before the planning board for a special permit would be solely because of development in a floodplain, not because of any other issues, dimensional or otherwise, with the proposed construction. I would suggest that a hardship exists here clearly, that what we have is a 10,000 square foot lot in a Residence A, or what would become a 10,000 square foot lot in a Residence A zoning district. The proposed development is for a single family home that meets all dimensional controls, and that if not permitted to build a single family home in a Residence A zoning district that is essentially entirely zoning compliant, there isn't much, if anything else, that could be done with this property under the circumstances. And finally, with respect to the third prong of the analysis, this clearly would not constitute a derogation of any kind from the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. Again, the use being proposed is entirely consistent with the uses on Marvin Street and in the district in general, a single-family home. It needs and asks this board for no variances with respect to dimensional controls, all setbacks, minimum lot size, height, so on and so forth, all within current zoning requirements under the code. And unfortunately, Marvin Street is not an accepted way within the city. That's something that is beyond the control of any property owners on Marvin Street. So I'd suggest to the board respectfully that the criteria for the grant of a variance are clearly met here, and therefore would ask the board to act favorably on the variance petition. And Mr. Nakashian is here, should the board have any particular questions of him relative to the proposed development. Thank you.
Question back to the planning board.
Yes.
Wouldn't you need their approval to do, because we're carrying it as 2 lots currently, right?
Right.
And
Yeah, forgive me, part of the relief that would presumably come from any grant of a special permit by the planning board would be the
create one lot.
combination of
Yep.
the 2 5,000 square foot lots into now a one single lot of 10,000
So
square feet.
that is something they'd have to act on.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And we're doing a single family only. We can put a condition in to that effect. Okay.
Well, the plan before the board, and if a variance is granted, is as per plans, which is for a single family.
Single family, yeah, okay. Questions, anyone? Comments? Adam? John?
I know there's some mounds on the land. When I was there, there's.
Yeah, that's all gonna be gone.
Is that just fill that someone dumped there?
Over the time, they filled it
Yeah, right, well, it's vacant land, good, it's good for that kind of stuff. Right, and, where you are right now, it's actually street, right? I mean, where the driveway is, you're gonna put the driveway in even before the end of the paved surface, is that because I'm not, when I was looking at it, I was trying to figure out where your land was, really.
Yeah, the land goes towards more, away from the street.
Goes beyond it?
Yeah.
But where the driveway is the paved section, is that?
Yeah, it stops in that area.
It's-
Gonna pave a little more?
It's difficult to tell from the plans, but currently the proposed siting of the home on what would be the combined 10,000 square foot lot, and specifically the driveway of the proposed home, are within the existing paved area of Marvin Street. And in fact, as part of the development, Mr. Nakashian will probably extend paving past its existing point, just because that would be beneficial for purposes of the home's construction and any potential sale of it.
And you're not gonna be they're not gonna be adding fill that might create problems for anybody else in the area? No?
It's gonna help, actually, because of the engineering, the way, right now, it's filled for the flooding purpose.
Yeah.
But now, when we develop it, it's gonna be a flow-through foundation, so that's gonna be helpful.
Yeah, I saw that on here, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I assume if this plan is accurate as to where the building is going to be sited, you got to go way over there due to the floodplain issues? It looks like it's going to be
Yeah,
sited way over to the, versus being in the middle of the lot.
Yeah, it's gonna be towards the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, away.
And who owns to the right here?
That's, I think, the
City.
Yeah,
city,
I thought so
city.
too. Yeah, it's 10,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Okay. Adam? No, I thought you were blinking away there. Bill? Catherine? Okay, 1 second. Where are you? Where is she? Right there. There we go.
Do you know how many houses on Marvin actually do not conform with the same
I'm not sure
section
I understand the question. Do not conform with?
the frontage requirement?
I don't know whether, do you mean in terms of linear frontage or frontage on?
On a public way, do you know, is every house on Marvin Street in the same situation you were at one point?
I believe so, yes. I believe whatever the length of Marvin Street is, it is not an accepted way in its entirety at this point in time.
Right, and I think there's about 4, there's one right across the street, and then 2 more. I think there's 4 structures currently there.
Thank you.
And I think all of them, the entire stretch of Marvin there, I believe, is unaccepted.
Yeah, I don't think any portion of Marvin is considered an accepted way within the city.
That's my understanding. Anyone else? No? No public? And would anyone like to make a motion?
I motion to grant it.
And,
I just on the grounds that I think that there is something unique about it, given that it's not a public way, and I think it would be substantial hardship. The property couldn't be used really, in essence, for anything without such a variance.
would there be a second?
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye? All right, so it's granted with a vote of 5-0.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Okay.